Welcome to our deep dive. We're taking a look at atomic habits.
Yeah.
You've sent over some really cool stuff.
Oh, good.
And I'm really excited to explore how we can apply these insights to, well, basically everything.
Pretty much.
So we're going to break down this book,
Yeah.
Atomic Habits,
Okay.
and distill those key ideas for building better habits. Maybe even saying goodbye to some bad ones along the way.
Absolutely.
What do you think?
So I think one of the most fascinating things about Atomic Habits
Yeah.
is how it flips the script on traditional goal setting,
Yeah.
advocating for a system of continuous improvement through these tiny changes.
Interesting.
It challenges us to think about progress, not as a race to the finish line,
Okay.
but as an ongoing journey of small wins that compound over time.
I see what you mean. It's more about building a sustainable system
Yes.
for growth rather than just chasing after these fleeting moments of achievement.
Right.
So it's not just about like wanting to run a marathon, but about establishing a running habit,
Yeah,
even if it starts with just a few minutes a day.
exactly. It's about shifting your focus from, those big audacious goals to those daily practices that lay the foundation for that long-term success.
Okay. And speaking of foundations,
Yeah.
the author's personal story of recovery after that baseball injury
Yeah.
really highlights this point, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Relearning to walk step by tiny step
Wow.
is a powerful illustration of how those small gains can lead to remarkable outcomes.
That story really struck me too.
Yeah.
I think it's a good reminder that progress isn't always linear.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, this concept, the plateau of latent potential,
Right.
is so fascinating.
Yeah.
It's almost like our brains trick us into thinking we're not making progress.
When in reality, we're like on the cusp of this breakthrough.
Yeah.
I imagine this knowledge could be incredibly helpful
Absolutely.
in those moments when you just feel like giving up.
Yeah, it's about trusting the process even when the results aren't immediately visible. Think of it like planting a seed.
Yeah.
You nurture it, you water it, you give it sunlight.
Right.
But it takes time for that growth to become apparent above the surface.
Right.
And the same principle applies to habit formation.
So how do we cultivate that patience and stay committed to the process?
I think it's a great question.
Yeah.
It's a challenge for sure.
Yeah.
Even when those results feel very far off, I think it's a matter of shifting your mindset from outcome-based thinking to a process-oriented behavior.
Yeah, interesting.
So instead of obsessing over hitting that specific target, you focus on building that system of habits and routines that will consistently move you
in the right direction.
That makes sense. But why does the author downplay the importance of goals?
Okay.
I'm sure most people would say that, goals are essential for success.
Sure. The author argues that solely focusing on goals can create a sense of conditional happiness.
Okay.
Like you're saying, I'll only be content once I achieve this specific outcome.
Gotcha.
It can also set you up for this all or nothing mentality.
Interesting.
Where you either achieve your goal and feel successful, or you fall short and feel like a failure.
So goals can be like a double-edged sword in a way.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
Okay.
It's almost like putting all your eggs in one basket.
Right.
And then feeling defeated if things don't go exactly as planned.
Yeah, totally.
And this is where the power of identity-based habits comes into play.
Interesting.
So instead of fixating on these external achievements,
you focus on cultivating the qualities and characteristics of the person you want to become.
Okay.
So, for example, if you want to be a writer, you start by acting like a writer.
Interesting.
You write every day.
Okay.
You seek out feedback, and you immerse yourself in the craft.
Okay.
So the actions shape the identity, not the other way around.
That's a powerful shift in perspective.
It is.
It's not about forcing yourself to do something you don't enjoy, but about becoming the type of person who just naturally gravitates towards those actions.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I remember you mentioned the 4 laws of behavior change, which I'm guessing are a key component
they are.
of building these identity-based habits.
They provide a really practical framework for understanding and changing any behavior.
So should we dive into those?
Absolutely, yeah. Let's start with the first law. Make it obvious. Okay. This emphasizes the importance of understanding the cues that trigger our habits.
Okay.
These subtle environmental signals that often operate beneath our conscious awareness.
Oh, why not?
It's like our autopilot mode.
I see. So this is where the habits scorecard comes in, right?
Yes.
I'm kind of curious to hear more about this.
Yeah, it's a simple exercise.
Okay.
You just list out your daily habits. So from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed.
Gotcha.
And by doing that, you gain that awareness of those automatic behaviors and the triggers that set them in motion.
It's like shining a spotlight on that autopilot.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I see. So once we've like identified those cues, how do we use this knowledge to like actually change our behavior?
You know, think about those Japanese train conductors who use pointing and calling to reduce errors. That seemingly redundant practice forces them to be more present and mindful. So we can apply the same principle to our own lives by consciously acknowledging the cues that trigger those habits.
Okay. So it's about like interrupting those unconscious patterns and bringing more awareness to our actions.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this first law like lays the foundation for making those intentional changes.
Yeah, and once you've identified those cues, you can start to redesign your environment.
Okay.
So make cues for good habits more obvious and tempting.
Okay.
While making those bad habits harder to indulge in.
So environment design plays a key role.
Oh, absolutely. Okay. Huge role.
I'm fascinated by this idea that like our surroundings can either support or like totally sabotage our efforts.
Exactly. And this leads us to the second law of behavior change.
Okay.
Make it attractive.
Okay. Interesting.
This law delves into the neurochemistry of habit formation, highlighting the powerful role that dopamine plays in driving our actions.
Oh, dopamine.
Yeah.
I'm always intrigued by how like our brain chemistry influences our behavior. Can you explain this a bit more?
Sure. Essentially, dopamine is the feel-good neurotransmitter that motivates us to seek out rewarding experiences and repeat those behaviors that make us feel good.
Gotcha.
So by understanding this mechanism, we can make our desired habits more appealing and enjoyable, increasing the likelihood that we'll stick with them.
Okay. So we're essentially like hacking our brain's reward system to our advantage. That's pretty clever.
It is, yeah.
But isn't there a risk of like becoming too reliant?
That's a great question, and one that the author addresses later in the book. It's about finding that balance between external motivators and intrinsic satisfaction.
Okay.
But before we jump ahead, there's another fascinating aspect of the second law I'd like to explore.
Okay.
The power of social influence.
Right.
You know, the author emphasizes how our social environment can have a profound impact on our habits.
Lovely.
It's like we're constantly absorbing the behaviors and beliefs of those around us.
Absolutely, yeah. This reminds me of that anecdote about the Polgar sisters.
Yes.
Those chess prodigies who were raised in a household where chess was like a central part of life.
Exactly.
It's almost like their environment like predisposed them to excel in that particular domain.
That's right. The author suggests we can leverage this principle to our advantage by surrounding ourselves with people who embody those qualities and habits we want to cultivate.
Right.
It's about creating a social ecosystem
that supports our desired growth.
Yeah.
He also introduces this really clever technique called habit stacking.
Okay.
Which involves linking a new habit to an existing one.
Okay.
It's like piggybacking on the momentum of an already established routine.
That's a great strategy.
It is.
It's almost like we're creating a chain reaction of positive habits.
Exactly.
But what if we're dealing with a habit that feels like overwhelming?
Yeah, that's a common challenge.
Yeah.
Or difficult to even like start. That's where the third law comes in.
Okay.
Make it easy.
Okay.
This principle is all about reducing the friction associated with those good habits and increasing the friction associated with those bad ones.
Gotcha.
It's about making those desired actions as effortless as possible and those undesirable actions as difficult as possible.
That sounds promising.
Yeah.
I'm all about making things easier.
Yeah, me too. Especially when it comes to like building positive habits.
Yeah, it can make a huge difference.
Could you give some examples of how we could like put this into practice?
Sure. The 2-minute rule is a great example.
Okay.
Instead of aiming for a 30-minute workout,
Right.
you just start by committing to putting on your workout clothes.
Oh, interesting.
By reducing that barrier to entry, you make it much more likely that you'll actually follow through.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
It's all about breaking down those daunting tasks
Right.
into like more manageable steps.
Exactly.
But what about those times when even like 2 minutes feels like too much?
You know, that's where environment design comes into play.
Okay.
The key is to optimize your surroundings.
Yeah.
To make those good habits as convenient and accessible as possible.
Okay.
So, for example, if you want to read more, strategically place a book on your bedside table.
Oh, okay.
If you want to eat healthier, stock your fridge with fresh produce and put those tempting snacks out of sight.
So it's not just about willpower.
It's not.
But about like setting ourselves up for success.
Yeah.
By creating an environment that supports those desired actions.
Absolutely.
Okay. I'm starting to see how these like first 3 laws kind of build upon each other.
They do.
Creating this like powerful system for habit change.
Exactly. Yeah.
And finally, we arrive at the 4th and final law.
Make it satisfying.
Okay.
This law emphasizes the importance
Yeah.
of rewarding ourselves for our efforts, ensuring that those good habits create a sense of pleasure and satisfaction.
This makes so much sense.
Yeah.
I think we often underestimate
the power of
like those little rewards in reinforcing our behaviors.
Absolutely.
I remember that study about the hand washing habits in Pakistan.
Yeah.
Simply making the hand washing experience more enjoyable like led to all those like positive changes.
That's a perfect illustration of how making a habit satisfying can dramatically increase its stickiness.
Okay.
It's about finding those little ways to make the process itself rewarding, not just the end result.
So it's not just about like delaying gratification, but about finding ways to inject some immediate pleasure into those habits that will benefit us in the long run.
Exactly. And this can be as simple as listening to your favorite music while you work out or treating yourself to a cup of tea after completing a challenging task.
Okay.
The key is to find those little rewards that make the process itself enjoyable.
Yeah.
But we also need to be mindful of the potential pitfalls of relying too heavily on those external motivators.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
It's all about finding that balance, right?
Yeah.
Between enjoying the journey and staying committed to the long-term vision.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm eager to like explore this further.
Well, there's much more to uncover, especially as the author delves into these more nuanced strategies for habit mastery.
Interesting.
But for now, let's just take a moment to digest these 4 laws.
Okay.
And consider how they might apply to your own life.
That sounds good.
You know, one of the most intriguing ideas from Atomic Habits is the notion that our current habits are essentially a reflection of our current identity.
Interesting.
It's not just about changing our actions, but about shifting our beliefs, about who we are at a fundamental level.
That's a profound thought.
It is.
It suggests that our habits aren't just isolated behaviors, but are like intertwined with our sense of self.
Yeah.
So if I want to become a more disciplined person, it's not just about forcing myself to follow a rigid schedule, but about like cultivating that sense of discipline as an integral part of my identity.
Exactly. It's about embracing those qualities and characteristics that align with your desired self-image. The author argues that lasting change stems from this internal shift in identity. If you see yourself as a healthy person, you're more likely to make choices that support that identity. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
I'm starting to see how this concept connects with the idea of building systems rather than chasing goals. It's about like creating a framework for behavior that's aligned with your values and aspirations.
Precisely. It's about designing a life.
I remember we touched on this briefly before, but I'd love to explore it in more detail.
Sure.
Let's start with the cue.
Okay, so the cue is the trigger that initiates the habit loop.
Okay.
It's a piece of information that predicts a reward.
Okay.
Think about the smell of freshly brewed coffee.
Yeah.
That's a cue that triggers a craving for a cup.
Right.
or seeing your running shoes by the door, that's a cue that triggers the urge to go for a run.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Okay.
It's any stimulus that sets the habit in motion.
So the cue is like a signal to our brain.
Right.
Saying like, hey, a reward is on the horizon. Get ready to act.
Exactly.
That's what happened.
That's where the craving comes in.
Okay.
Cravings are the motivational force behind our habits.
Okay.
They're the feeling of wanting or desiring something.
Right.
It's the anticipation of pleasure.
Okay.
Or the desire to alleviate discomfort.
So the cue triggers the craving, and then comes the response.
You got it. The response is the actual habit itself, the action we take to satisfy that craving. It could be making that cup of coffee, going for that run, or even checking our phones for notifications.
Right.
It's the behavioral manifestation of the habit loop.
And then, of course, comes the reward.
Yes.
Which is the satisfying outcome that reinforces the habit, making us more likely to repeat it in the future.
Exactly.
I'm curious, what are some examples of rewards that might, like, drive our habits?
Rewards can be tangible, like a delicious meal or a paycheck, or they can be intangible, like a feeling of accomplishment, social approval, or stress relief. The key is that the reward creates a positive association with the habit, making it more likely that we'll repeat it.
So the habit loop is like a cycle that starts with a trigger, leads to a desire, results in an action, and culminates in a satisfying payoff. This understanding seems like crucial for anyone who wants to change their behavior.
Absolutely. By understanding this cycle, we can start to identify the cues, the cravings, the responses, and the rewards that drive our own habits. And that's where the 4 laws of behavior change come into play.
We talked about those earlier. It seems like they provide like a practical framework for applying this knowledge of the habit loop.
Exactly. Let's revisit those laws in the context of this cycle. The first law, make it obvious, is all about becoming more aware of the cues that trigger our habits. It's about paying attention to those environmental signals that often prompt those automatic responses. Remember the habit scorecard. That's a great tool for bringing those unconscious cues into awareness.
It's like becoming a detective of your own behavior, uncovering those hidden triggers that drive your actions. And once you've identified those cues, what's the next step?
The second law, make it attractive, focuses on increasing our desire for those good habits. We can do this by leveraging the power of dopamine, by making those desired actions more appealing and enjoyable. We discuss techniques like habit stacking and temptation bundling, which can be quite effective.
Habit stacking involves linking a new habit to an existing one.
That's right.
While temptation bundling pairs an activity we want to do with an activity we need to do. These strategies seem like clever ways to like tap into our brain's reward system. But what if we're dealing with a habit that just feels inherently like unappealing?
That's where the third law, make it easy, becomes essential. This law is all about reducing the friction associated with those good habits. It's about streamlining those desired actions and making them as effortless as possible. Remember the 2-minute rule and the power of environment design.
The 2-minute rule involves like breaking down those daunting tasks into small, manageable steps, while environment design is all about optimizing our surroundings to make those good habits more convenient.
That's right.
It's fascinating how these strategies can significantly influence our behavior without relying solely on willpower.
Exactly.
And finally, we come to the 4th law. Make it satisfying. The importance of reinforcing those good habits by making them feel good in the moment. It's about creating a sense of pleasure or accomplishment that makes us want to repeat those actions. I'm starting to see how these 4 laws create a comprehensive system for habit change. They address the entire habit loop, from the initial trigger to the final reward.
That's right.
But I'm curious, isn't there a risk of becoming too reliant?
That's a thoughtful question, and it's one that the author addresses as he delves into more advanced tactics for habit mastery.
Interesting.
He explores the idea of finding your zone of genius,
Oh.
aligning your habits with your natural talents and interests, and cultivating a sense of flow in your daily activities.
Those concepts sound intriguing.
They are.
I'm eager to explore them further.
So we've talked about the power of tiny gains,
Yeah.
the importance of systems, and those 4 laws of behavior change.
Right.
It seems like we're starting to understand the mechanics of habit formation, but I'm curious about the psychology behind it all. You know, what are some of those deeper insights that Atomic Habits offers?
One of the most compelling ideas, I think, is this notion that our brains are wired to prioritize immediate rewards over delayed gratification.
Oh, absolutely.
It explains why we often struggle to, stick to those habits that offer long-term benefits, but require short-term sacrifices.
Yeah.
Think about it. It's so much easier to reach for that sugary snack now than to, resist it for the sake of our future health.
Exactly.
That's so true. It's like we're constantly battling between our present desires and our future aspirations.
Right.
But why is our brain wired this way? It seems like it would make more sense to prioritize those actions that, benefit us in the long run.
You know, the author explains that this tendency stems from our evolutionary history.
Okay.
So for most of human existence, survival depended on meeting those immediate needs, like finding food, water, and shelter.
Okay.
Our brains evolved to prioritize those actions that offered immediate rewards, as those rewards often meant the difference between life and death.
So we're essentially operating on outdated software.
Yeah, in a way.
Our brains haven't quite caught up to the complexities of modern life, where those immediate rewards aren't always essential for survival.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And it's why we need to be more, deliberate and strategic in designing our habits.
Okay.
We can't just rely solely on willpower to overcome those, deeply ingrained instincts.
Okay.
We need to find ways to make those good habits more appealing and those bad habits less tempting.
That makes sense. So how do we bridge that gap between our desire for immediate gratification and our, aspirations for long-term growth? It seems like a constant struggle.
It is. It's a challenge.
Yeah.
The author offers several strategies for navigating this challenge. One of the most effective is to find ways to make those good habits feel good in the moment. It's about adding some immediate satisfaction to those behaviors that will ultimately benefit us in the long run.
Could you elaborate on that?
Sure.
How do we make those good habits more immediately rewarding?
You know, we can incorporate activities we enjoy into our routines, track our progress to create a sense of accomplishment, or reward ourselves for those small wins along the way.
Okay.
It's about finding those little things that make the process itself more pleasurable and engaging.
So it's not about denying ourselves pleasure, but about finding, healthy and sustainable ways to reward ourselves for our efforts.
Exactly. And it's about shifting our perspective from delayed gratification to immediate satisfaction. Instead of focusing on the sacrifices we're making, we highlight the rewards we're reaping right now.
I like that. It's a more positive and empowering approach.
It is.
Now, remember, you mentioned the concept of finding your zone of genius.
Yes.
Could you explain what that means and how it relates to habit formation?
The author argues that we're more likely to excel in those areas where we have a natural inclination or talent. It's about identifying those activities that feel effortless and enjoyable because they align with our inherent strengths.
So it's about choosing habits that play to our strengths.
Yes.
Rather than trying to force ourselves to do things that feel like a chore.
Precisely. And when we're engaged in activities that fall within our zone of genius, we're more likely to experience that state of flow, that feeling of being completely absorbed in what we're doing. Where time seems to fly by.
Flow state.
Yeah.
That's a wonderful feeling.
It is.
It's those moments where we're, at our most productive and creative.
Right.
But how do we, cultivate that sense of flow in our daily lives?
It's about finding that sweet spot of challenge. Those tasks that are just difficult enough to keep us engaged, but not so overwhelming that they lead to frustration.
Okay.
It's also about mastering the fundamentals of our chosen craft so that we can execute those actions with ease and precision.
This reminds me of the author's emphasis on the Goldilocks rule, right? Finding that just right level of challenge that keeps us like motivated and engaged.
That's right.
It seems like all of these concepts are like interconnected, finding your zone of genius, cultivating flow, embracing the Goldilocks rule.
Yeah.
They all point to the importance of finding those activities that like resonate with our natural abilities and passions.
Exactly. And when we align our habits with our intrinsic motivations, those actions feel less like obligations and more like expressions of who we truly are.
Yeah.
It becomes a virtuous cycle where our habits reinforce our identity and our identity shapes our habits.
This deep dive has been incredibly enlightening.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that.
I feel like I have like a whole new framework for understanding and approaching habit formation.
That's great.
But before we wrap up,
I'm
curious to hear your final thoughts on what we've explored today.
Okay.
What are those like key takeaways that you'd like to leave our listener with?
You know, I think Atomic Habits reminds us that even small changes consistently applied over time can lead to, remarkable transformation.
Right.
It's about embracing the power of tiny gains, building systems for continuous improvement, and aligning our habits with our desired identity.
Okay.
And most importantly, it's about finding joy and satisfaction in the journey, not just the destination.
That's beautifully said.
Thank you.
It's a message of hope and empowerment.
It is.
It suggests that we all have the capacity to like create positive change in our lives.
We do.
One small habit at a time.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and insights with us today.
My pleasure.
It's been an absolute pleasure exploring this fascinating topic with you.
The pleasure was all mine.
And to our listener,
we
hope you found this deep dive into Atomic Habits insightful and inspiring. Remember, even the smallest actions repeated consistently can compound into extraordinary results.
They can.
So, what tiny change will you embrace today?